And now we look at part 2 of the life of David. We just looked at David's political triumphs and spiritual triumphs. Also, he had great military triumphs. David was successful in battle and had the whole region secure. That is quite something for the most fought-over parcel of real estate in human history, to have peace in the land. You could see here that this kind of purpley area that I am now making green was the kingdom of King Saul. Then David's kingdom stretched all the way here, so significantly bigger. This area up here was the area of King Solomon's economic influence. But for right now, this was the kingdom of Israel under David, and this would be regarded as the golden age of Israel for biblical times. Now we turn our attention to David's sin. This is a hinge point in David's story. It begins with adultery with a woman named Bathsheba. Adultery with Bathsheba. Interestingly, Bathsheba was actually taking a bath on the roof of her house. David was in a palace, saw her. He was powerful, he wanted her, and brought her into the palace and committed adultery with her. This is interesting because David was wealthy, had high approval ratings, was living in peace, had every marker of success, had, quite frankly, plenty of wives, but he desired Bathsheba, took her, and obviously grievous sin in God's eyes. The problem here was that Bathsheba got pregnant on the one-night stand, and so David had to arrange for Bathsheba's husband Uriah to be murdered. Now this is a much longer story. Uriah was a officer in David's army. David brought him back to Jerusalem from the battle he was in, tried to get him to go home, and he would not. And ultimately, David ordered that Uriah be put on the front lines of the battle where he would most likely be killed, and Uriah was killed. Then David brought Bathsheba into the palace. The prophet Nathan came and confronted David with this sin. So David did confess with the prophet Nathan. I don't have time to tell the whole story, but it's interesting that when the prophet Nathan confronted David, he didn't confront him with the sin at first. He told him a story about a rich man, a poor man, and sheep, which drew David very much into the story since he used to be a shepherd. And from within that story, then Nathan confronted David with the sin. This resulted in David's family troubles. You will see this one-night stand had a ripple effect throughout David's family and the nation. First, the boy that was born to Bathsheba died. Second, there was incest in the palace. Amnon and his sister Tamar. So Amnon and Tamar had different mothers, but the same father. That was David, so half brother, sister. And Amnon was, quote unquote, in love, or I would say just merely infatuated with his sister, and he ended up raping her, and then treated her, even continued to treat her disgracefully after that. Well, Tamar had a brother, full-blood brother, same father and mother. His name was Absalom, and Absalom would not forgive his half-brother Amnon, and so Absalom kills his brother Amnon. David's family troubles. Next, we turn to David's kingdom troubles. First, there is a rebellion and civil war against Absalom and his army. Absalom was quite the leader, had the bearing of a prince, and over time, more and more people sided with Absalom. And when Absalom felt like he had enough strength, he rebelled against his father. Rather than having a war at Jerusalem, David and his closest associates fled the city, and Absalom walked into the palace and was king. There's an interesting story about how David sends a spy to Absalom, and the spy advises Absalom in a way that ultimately helps David. There was a civil war, and in this civil war, David's men were successful, and Absalom was on his mule fleeing from David's troops, and he had very thick, big hair, and his hair got caught in a thicket. And it got so caught that the animal he was riding ran out from under him, and he was left there hanging in those bushes, trees, by his hair. And then he was found and put to death. So the civil war stopped there. The rebellion stopped there. Secondly, there was another rebellion by Sheba. This is just a minor story, but I bring it up because the two sides were Judah was one side, and then the other tribes of Israel were another side. So through the story of Sheba, you see that there begins to have a crack in the unity of Israel, of this kingdom. And then lastly, for your notes today, a census of fighting men, and it resulted in a plague. Now, let me show you something here. I'm going to go back a few slides to right here. So David took a census of the soldiers. This was unfaithful because back then you needed to trust in God for your battles and not your soldiers, and one way you showed trust was by not counting the soldiers. So the prophet said, the judgment is going to be multiple choice. David, you choose. A, 3 years of famine. B, 3 months of your enemies defeating your army. Or C, 3 days of a plague. Well, David wisely chose C. It was the shortest, and thought that God would have mercy. As this plague swept through Israel, the book of 2 Samuel ends. It seems to end on a kind of downer note. But at the very end of the book, David runs out of his palace and up to the hill of Mount Moriah. He buys this area from the guy that owns it, offers a sacrifice here, and the plague was stopped. And this is where David was going to plan to have his son build the temple. And so it is here on Mount Moriah that but his son Solomon built the temple. And so what we see at the end of 2 Samuel, despite the plague, God was setting up the place on planet Earth where his very special presence would dwell.